So real briefly, I'm just going to do a couple quick updates on recent things happening for US DSCSA and a little foreshadowing of some of the things that the FDA and the industry has been talking about for the final phase of the regulation in 2023. The FDA came out with 3 primary DSCSA guidance documents. Guidance documents in the US are like rules to say how to implement DSCSA as a law. They don't always tell you everything that they want, but they give you a sense of what the FDA is doing. So the first one that came out, first major one, there was a minor one in January, but first major one that came out, or 2 of them in March, were definitions of suspect product and illegitimate product. Really simply, this one was straightforward. It just said there was some clarification of how the FDA thought about what it meant to say a product was counterfeit, diverted, part of a fraudulent transaction, or unfit for distribution. So just some clarification of definitions, right? More meaningful was the standardization of data and documentation practices. This was another required guidance by the FDA. It came out much, much later than anybody anticipated. This doesn't talk about serialization. This talks about the 2015 lot level requirements that the companies have to meet. And it's basically talking about how do you standardize the data. It had clarification definitions for each of the data elements in the TI, like the lot number, like the party that is selling the product, the party that is buying the product code, et cetera. So there's clarifications in there. I could spend an hour talking about that guidance, in part because it's long, in part because it actually has information in it that changes what the common interpretation was of the industry for how you managed information. And we actually did a cloud community webinar on that in March because it was important enough to share it out. Glad to talk with you in more detail about that or give you links to that community webinar to check out the information. But that one was important, and the industry is still formulating responses back to that guidance. It's in draft form. And the final one that came out a few weeks ago was the waivers, exceptions, and exemptions. This one really has descriptions about 3 things. How a member of the supply chain may request a waiver from some of the requirements. Maybe it's because you feel that you are a very small business and this is too burdensome. Or there might be something unique about your operations or the products that you have. So what are the processes and procedures for asking for a waiver from any one of the small parts of the DSCSA law? The second is how the FDA can determine if there should be exemptions because of the package form. If you have a vial that is too small, it's a single use, single package, and it might just be too small to put a 2D data matrix and the human readable on it, the FDA might work with you to come up with an exemption for that. So they're documented how to do that. And the third is just some statements that they put in about how to determine how the FDA uses the logic to say, how do I determine if you get an exemption for a product or a transaction? Maybe you have an orphan medicine that has a very small population and it's a very safe supply chain. You could ask the FDA for an exemption for that product and say it's under control. So this gives, it doesn't say what the classifications are, it says what's the process for asking for that kind of waiver. Last thing, real quickly, the FDA held 3 public meetings that were talking about the future, that were talking about 2023. Why is that important? So that's phase 3 of the law. And phase 3, as I mentioned, says the establishment of an electronic interoperable system for tracing medicines at the saleable package level. What the law also says is the transaction history, the thing that documents all of the sales transactions for a product going back to the manufacturer and follows the product in the supply chain, that the term that is used in the law is sunsets. It goes away. TH is not in the law in 2023. So I'll tell you right now that the way that we collectively, those serving the US, are billing the lot level traceability today will change for 2023. We just don't know how yet. These public meetings were meant to bring the industry together to stimulate thinking of what that future should look like. What does electronic interoperability mean? What new standards for data exchange do we need? What are the potential data architectures? Should there be a semi-centralized system to allow you to exchange data instead of with each other on a horizontal basis? Do you exchange certain data with some systems, some hubs that might exist? Or do you have a lookup kind of directory to find out who to request information from? Pretty much everything is up for grabs for 2023. You can take that away, and it's kind of scary for some people who say, I just got done with lot-level traceability, and now I have to blow it up. The intention isn't to blow it up. The intention is to say, let's rethink all the tools we have and figure out if we need any changes. The other thing, though, is the FDA was designed to use this to announce their vision of the future. And their vision is not just compliance. So they laid out a number of key principles, capabilities, and aspects of their vision they wanted the industry to think about. A lot of these you'd expect. Provide reasonable, reliable access to safe and effective medicines. Secure the systems that are being used to manage that from falsification attacks. And saying it's really important to meet those 2023 deadlines, and we need to work together. The other thing is that the FDA really pushed hard to say near real-time interoperability and data exchange at the unit level should be the goal, and the industry should not back away from the goal. And that complacency towards these goals is not acceptable by the FDA. The other thing they did was exhort or prod the industry to say, don't just do this for compliance. What they said was, a fully digitized supply chain, this is a quote from them, a fully digitized supply chain can do more if agile and advanced enough. And they laid out a long number of potential future benefits. We would call them sort of value-oriented benefits, right? I just put 3 up here. Analytics on medicine and their supply in the supply chain. Issues with supply disruption. There's on average 300 to 450 drug shortages every year in the United States for prescription medicines. The FDA feels that a system like this, like a Sentinel system, could be used to help that. And things to support stuff like enablement of personalized medicine. Are there ways that the visibility and product identification in the supply chain can facilitate that sort of micro-targeting of medicines? And the last thing is the industry, and I didn't put the list up, but again, I did a webinar on the FDA public meetings where I documented a lot of information that went on across all of these. The industry said, we need your help, FDA. We don't want you to tell us everything we have to do. We want you to provide like guardrails on a road. Let us determine which lane we're going to drive in, but just keep us from driving off into the trees. And so they laid out a list of about 20 things they'd like the FDA to provide better feedback on.